Welcome back to the Automotive Informants, your place for the most unbiased, unfiltered, and sometimes unhinged automotive news. I'm here with my co-host, Chris Martinez, and today we have a very special guest, my father, Marty Fritz. Welcome, Marty.
Thanks, Zach.
Welcome,
Glad to be
Marty.
here. Thanks,
We're
Chris.
excited to
Appreciate it.
have you, Marty. We're really excited. A little known fact for people in the audience, Marty and I go way back. I actually met Marty in, I think, 2005, may have
Somewhere
been
around there. Yeah.
2006, something like. You had just moved to the store, and I think the story was you had moved to Dallas, and then they said, no, you know what? We need you in San Antonio. And or something like that, and you had literally moved two places in like 90-day span, and because they said, you know what, we actually really want you over here instead.
Yeah, I'd been in Northern California having a blast, running a location with about 1,200 units a month recon and 1,200 units a month sales, plus a wholesale auction on a postage stamp. And they said, come back to Texas. We're going to bring you to Dallas. So I was all lined up to go to Dallas. Had been working with realtors, and then out of the blue, we're going to pivot, right? And the old famous pivot scene. And we pivoted, and it was, we're going to San Antonio. And that was an interesting sell to the wife. The kids really didn't care. They were like, hey, we'll get back to Texas, more grandma and grandpa all the time. But the wife was like, why San Antonio? And I said, really can't get into the details. Let's just say somebody got promoted to customer. So,
It's unreal, right? Like,
right.
and I think when I got hired on there, they had 30 locations, so it was
Yeah.
still early, days, almost startup mentality type thing, and it's kind of cool to, in real time to see, or remember in real time what that looked like and sounded like, and now, it's kind of veered off and done something a little different than what, I think in the beginning what it was sought out to do. I think it's failed to kind of evolve from that. So, or
Yeah.
the evolution has gone the wrong way. I'm glad to have you on board here.
Yeah, definitely. You're right. It was one of the early stores. And what was really funny, a bit of trivia for you, is they numbered the locations based on how they bought the real estate. And the funniest part was that particular location, the last two digits were 52, meaning it was the 52nd piece of land they'd purchased. It had opened probably 12 years prior to the location I'd been at prior, which was numbered 47. So they bought that property before, but mothballed it. And yeah, I think that San Antonio location opened 96, 97. So it was probably, like you said, one of the first 30 that opened, and then they kind of stopped. And then it was gangbusters after that. And then it's kind of been interesting to watch over the last 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, that's kind of cool, man. But we've got a great lineup today. Zach, I know we looked at some of the headlines before jumping on. You want to go ahead and get started with that one you were talking about?
Yeah, it kind of doing this intro makes me think, there should be a punchline here with how many ex-CarMax employees does it take to run a podcast? I guess the number right now is 3. So, we had discussed beforehand, we were talking about last week's episode and that analog resistance with Gen Z not wanting new cars, which a lot of data coming out is supporting. And so I kind of wanted to get your take on this, Marty, are you seeing this across the industry? What do you think the deal is?
Yeah, I think you're going to continue to see it. And I think there's a couple factors at play. One is obviously just the cost, the acquisition cost, right? And the second one, I think, is one that we don't often think about in the automotive space, but it's the cost of living. So just rent or lease or a mortgage payment is significantly higher than it was 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. You think pre-COVID, we've seen dramatic increases there. And so a lot of these Gen Z are choosing to live closer to where they work, so they don't need a car. They're going to walk, they're going to bike, they're going to Lime, they're going to Uber. And they look at it mathematically and they say, if my average payment is somewhere between 700 and 800 on a vehicle, I can definitely do that for less and put that money towards eating out or paying rent or whatever they look at. And I think that's a factor that doesn't go noticed very often. I think a lot of people just leave it out of the conversation. The other thing I think that's at play is, a lot of these Gen Z are just starting out in their career. And so percentage wise, if you broke it up, I'd say a good 2/3 are not at an earning level where they can even afford a vehicle that they want, especially a newer model vehicle. So now they're looking at used. Now you look at used prices though, and they've stayed fairly elevated over the last few years. And that leads them to look even deeper in the aging, right? And so now they start looking at these 10, 15, 20, 25-year-old vehicles, and they become more of a project car, kind of a, just something that's not necessarily a daily for them. Yet, I think a lot of them will start transitioning to dailies with that type of vehicle. And then I think lastly, they're just a different mindset. They look at things differently. They are more of a cashless society, if you will. And so when you think of that, they're looking at what do I want now and in the moment. And if I can tap my card and buy dinner, or I can tap my car and take an Uber, or tap my car and buy whatever, personal goods I need, that's how they're going to do it. Versus, hey, if I have to kick 700-800 a month to a car payment and then top that off with insurance and maintenance and fuel, yeah, I could put that to better use, is their mindset.
100%. And Chris, that kind of goes with what we were talking about earlier with debt to income. You want to hit on that a little bit?
Yeah, I was going to say that, like, you think about how much people are making, that really hasn't increased, but everything else has increased, right? You said the real estate, you've got your mortgage payments or rental payments, rents have gone through the roof, insurance, think about like even your renter's insurance, if you even have insurance, homeowner's insurance, all of the insurances, the car insurance, all of it's gone up. And then you think about the income hasn't. So then you got your payment to income. Payment to income, looking at deals over the last 23 years, always been around 15%, is like really where you wanted to have your payment to income, right? And now the average new car payment at $768, that's like 68%. So now you're looking at that like, okay, well, there's a reason why. Let's go look at this 20-year-old car, because the 10-year-old car is like 20 grand. And you're just like, well, man, we can't even afford that, because you got a 10% interest rate. Average interest rate today is 9.52. That's on new cars. So just imagine what a used car payment interest rate is. So yeah, there's a lot when you start looking at what the market, where the market's at, the data that's coming out, and this is all verified by Cox Automotive. They've released this report yesterday, actually. So when you look at this data, it's not looking good. And the people that are buying these 16 million cars a year are people that are more affluent. I mean, average new car price is $49,855. So 50 grand for a new car now. I mean, it's unreal. I think you're going to see more of it for sure.
It's kind of one where I've even seen with myself. I've been buying up project cars lately and kind of flipping them on the side, and you're just kind of messing around with that. And everything I've bought has been 2000 to 2007 is kind of my range right now. And it's almost instant the moment you list it up on Facebook Marketplace, and the margin is absolutely insane. And you see this divide where you have people who are affluent, like you said, and can afford these, almost $50,000 new cars. And then they get rid of their old car for next to nothing. I've paid as low as $200 for a driving car. And then you go flip it to somebody and it's, a few $1,000s. And they're all Gen Z. They're all younger kids who are like, hey, this is going to be my daily driver. But I work in, for me, it's downtown Denver. And they ride a scooter to work, or they lime around or ride a bike. And they're like, yeah, I just need this for the occasional trip out of town.
Look at even what the data says. Compact SUV sales are down. Midsize SUV sales are down. But subcompact SUV sales are up. So everybody's literally just downsizing. And so that average new car payment of $768, just imagine if you took out those subcompact, what the real payment is. You know what I'm saying? Because that actually equated to, because those two segments are down as far as they're down, that's like 66% of the entire market. So it's not looking good, And so then, I talked about it last week about that one article that, the SAR by 2040 is going to be down, from 16 million to 14 million, it's only going to get worse. I don't see it getting any better. And that's where I think dealers really need to focus on service, maximizing, increasing, your service hours potentially. We did a really good job. Marty did an amazing job when we needed more bays. We went on a 24-hour schedule to recondition more of those cars because you couldn't put enough throughput because everything was at capacity during the day. So he's like, you know what, let's just open it up 24 hours. We'll have a night shift and let's work those hours and get that reconditioning and pump out more units. And, with that type of, people, I hadn't heard of anyone doing that. And then much less today, they're not doing it. So, it's kind of interesting that when you see and look at, because I talk to dealers every day, and when I talk to them, first things I talk to them about is how many service bays they have, what kind of capacity, what could we do to help drive more revenue there, because ultimately that's what's going to drive your UIO and help get you more sales because you've got more customers there. So
I loved night shift. That was whenever I worked for CarMax. I was on night shift and it was so quiet and peaceful, and you see this interesting, and maybe it's actually a better thing to bring it back up this time around, especially with this new generation of technicians and people working in dealerships. You see a lot more people who are both working in a relationship, so their spouse is off working during the day, they're watching the kids during the day, so whenever they're flipping schedules at night, it might be easier to get talent in the door if you do have that night shift. And that's
that's a challenge. Nobody's got it. I mean, how many stores do you know of that you guys talk to? I mean, Marty, when was the last time you heard of anybody doing it?
Well, he's taken my playbook. So when I built it out, that's part of what I looked at it. Historically, I'd found at locations that were running the night shift, we didn't have the best behaviors on the night shift. And I go back to when I was a teenager, my parents said nothing good happens at 2 a.m. You don't need a 2 a.m. curfew. You need a midnight curfew. Because at 2 hours, that's when the trouble happens, right? And so I carried that forward, and it was true. Every location I'd run prior to coming to San Antonio, I'd seen that challenge where mistakes were made or behaviors were bad. And so where I took it with San Antonio, I changed it and I said, this is going to be where it's a privilege to be on night shift. It's because it works for you, but you're going to make it work for us, right? So it had to be a two-way street. And what Zach just said is really true. We had a lot there in San Antonio who that exact scenario played out. Spouse worked during the day. Our technician or detailer or painter that was on night shift or even inventory was taking care of kids or taking care of the home. And then 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, they came in and worked their night shift. And where it became really successful is when you did make it a privilege, because now you had your best performing associates. Your most responsible people were on that night shift. And I do think that's something that causes pause or hesitation for a lot of shops and dealerships to create a night shift, because they don't want that risk. Because again, if there's very few places to go for dinner or grab a snack or a drink at 2 a.m, your risk is pretty high. Now, one could argue today there's a lot more choices than there were 10 or 15 years ago. However, I still think the challenge is there's less people out at those hours. And so getting a team that's focused and being able to do that, he's also right when he says it's quiet. I'm telling you, volume and productivity shoot through the roof in those overnight hours, because again, they have less distractions. They don't have salespeople coming back saying, hey, can you check this? Can you check that? I got a customer ready to buy. You don't have managers looking for things. You don't have any kind of those, we'll call them heat cases, whether it's coming from sales or service, right? And then lastly, it's also an opportunity for you, like you said, Chris, to really metric and look at what is your efficiency or productivity potential per bay. So what are you doing today and what could you be doing? And again, I think a lot of people try to start at 100%. They say, I got to be at 100%. No, you need to look and see where are you today, because you're probably going to be below 100. When you do the real math, you're probably going to be 50 to 70. Now what you have to do is say incrementally, how do I get back to 100? And then anything over 100 is just a bonus, right? It's not an expectation. You have to be really careful, because when you look at that, there's always going to be things that slow you down. always going to be interruptions or distractions, especially during the normal daylight hours. And at night, if something happens, it can slow you down a lot worse. You know, if the compressors go down or the power goes out or inclement weather comes in, it's a game changer at the overnight hour.
It really is. I think about, so, one of the stores that I helped run, we took a used car department from 50 cars a month to over 500 cars a month. And when you start thinking about reconditioning, where you're going to put your people, how do you get the throughput, how do you maximize your shop, we had to pull out every play I knew that I worked through. And that's why I always think CarMax helped me play at a level outside of them that, has helped me the last 23 years. So I think those things that I learned from you, from the team there in San Antonio, I mean, I've taken that wherever I've gone. And now, we've also expanded that when I was at my Mercedes store to mobile service and things like that, where you can really kind of optimize. But there's so many dealers that are just kind of sleeping on the opportunity that's at hand, and why this right to repair bill could potentially, make things even harder for them. Because right now, yes, profit is up in service. It's at some stores. I'd say, I don't know what the percentage is, but every store I've talked to, yes, the profit's up. RO count is down though, right?
Mhm.
And where's that RO business going? It's going to all the independents. And if they see that dropping year over year today, what's that look like when this right to repair bill passes and everyone else is playing the same game?
Yeah. It's another huge challenge for the industry because I think it's so the first thing there is they've got a big decision to make. Are they going to be in the service business or not? And historically, service business does way more than keep the lights on. You know, it puts a lot of revenue on the top and that comes down through to the bottom line. And so we have to figure out how do we keep that trend going and potentially even get it to start to have a positive trend line to where we're getting some growth in scale. The biggest challenge in front of us, though, is staffing. It absolutely comes down to can you get enough people to fill the bays, to do the work, to answer the phones, to supply the parts, to do all the necessary functions, whether it's daylight or after hours, overnight type shifts. That's really the key element. And I mean, every article I've read over the last, 10 years, we have more technicians leaving the industry than are coming in. And I think that kind of goes back up to Gen Z is how do you get these Gen Z kids to say, and I shouldn't have said kids, how do you get these Gen Z individuals, these young adults to come in and say, how do I get into this industry and make money? And the reality is they can do really well in this industry. It's just getting them in the industry, getting them acquainted with the industry, getting them to see the positives and the value, because I think that also changes the narrative. I look back when I was, 18 years old, fresh out of high school, I had no intent of being in the automotive industry for 3 decades.
They
I
had
didn't
cars.
ever think, huh?
They had cars.
They had cars. We had wheels that we carved out of stone with chisels,
Yeah.
and we pedaled with our feet, but it worked really well. But
You know,
but I didn't. I had no interest. It wasn't on my radar, and it really was something I fell into during college when I answered an ad for a part-time job in the tire business. And when I got in the tire business, I saw three things. It was a lot of fun. I was making a difference. I was solving problems for people, which sounds crazy, but you were getting people back on the road. And then the other thing was I was making good money. And I was like, wow, if I can do this here, let's see where this goes.
well, I think that's the challenge. What I see, that I hear a lot of people talk about, there's not enough people, not enough people. And I'm under the impression that if you just have a process where you can train the right people, or it's because I think there's a lot of people available. I just think there's no real roadmap in the industry today where they have set a budget or some kind of roadmap to say, hey, look, this is how we're going to train people. We're going to onboard them here. We're going to get them through this process and show them that roadmap, because all they're looking for is people with experience. Well, everybody's looking for experience. I mean, it is what it is. So go after the people that have no experience, teach them, show them the roadmap, and then grow them. And I think if people just got behind growing your own people, and I think that's one of the plays I took out of CarMax, right? They hire all their people, they teach them all. They don't hire people with, they basically get people with no experience, and then they teach them how to do it. And I think if the industry can kind of go that direction, but then they've got tools, and I think you and Zach might be doing something in that training type thing that I think would be amazing. I don't know if you guys can fill me in on that, or if I kind of preemptively said something out loud. My apologies,
It's
but
okay.
it's
It's I've been working on this for, I think I'm on year 4 of putting this together because it is a lot, especially to kind of take everything that I've worked on with, UTI, ASE, Audi Academy, Mercedes Star, and put all this together and figure out, well, how do you then translate that into a roadmap for people who want to join the industry? And then same thing that I do in my content where it's, do you need to go to trade school, or do you just start off as a lube tech and then work your way up? And then how do you then negotiate that? How do you then roadmap this out to become successful in the industry without giving that false hope of you'll make 6 figures? Like, not off the bat, but how do you get there responsibly and actually build your career without hitting a wall, which I think is the discouragement for a lot of technicians as well as a lot of people entering the industry, is they go in with high hopes, but their expectations might not be appropriately set, and therefore they just stall out, they burn out, and they say, hey, screw it, I'm going to go, I don't know, make a Subway sandwich for people or whatever they do after the automotive industry.
Well, and I'll add this. There's a couple elements as well that you mentioned UTI, and so I think UTI is a great school, great format, offers a wonderful program. The thing that's tough is it's not free, right? Unless you've got some kind of scholarship or fund that's helping you go through that school. For the majority of the students, this is a program they're paying for, and it's not too far off the equivalent time for a regular college or university program that we see today. So we're talking 30 to 50,000 annually to go and get an automotive degree from an accredited school like UTI and some of the others out there. You're going to come out and you're going to be well trained, you're going to be ready to hit the ground running, but you're going to hit the ground at an entry level role. And I think that's the setup that's tough. Most of the students come out of UTI thinking I'm going to be in the mid 20s, maybe even $30 an hour on my flat rate. And the reality is they're going to come into the industry between 15 and 20 and probably be put on hourly, probably be put in an apprentice program that's 6 months to a year, and they are not looking for that. And so you see a lot of churn. So if they start at a CarMax, they may do that for 3 or 4 months, and then they may leave for a traditional dealer or the reverse. The other thing that plays out here too is how do you put value on, if I went to trade school, where does that rank? If I've gotten ASEs, where does that rank? Are there any state credentials that are needed? And then are there any manufacturer specific training or OEM specific training as well? So how do you put all these in there and say, here's what that warrants as far as a compensation range? So, and funny word, you're gonna laugh, we called it techometer. We literally had this. We literally had this way to do an analysis. Not saying it was bulletproof. It wasn't. It was swag, but we were able to put some information in there, and you could get you a range that made sense and it lined up. Today, many people aren't using anything like that. I think if we were using things like that to be consistent and to be fair, and then if we were being equitable and saying, okay, you've been with us 6 months, and since you started, you were at 0 ASEs, now you're at 4. You've got 10 OE certifications here through whatever make or brand. Now we're going to give you a bump, right? We're going to bump your pay a little bit. Maybe not a full bump, but a little bump, right? And so those kind of things are motivating. They inspire them. And then I think another element that's a challenge today comes back to when do you get these individuals interested? When do you create the awareness? And right now that awareness is kind of happening because they're coming to it. Nobody's necessarily going to them. Now there are trades or career fairs, there are events like that they'll go to, but they're not hitting consistently, and not every dealership is taking the time or the opportunity. One of the best things I ever attended was Wyotech. So started out in Wyoming, they've got campuses now across the country. But I remember going to the old Wyotech, the original campus in Wyoming, and going there and just seeing rows and rows of tables and all these dealerships and automotive groups and independents and CarMax, and we were all there and we were vying for all these students for their attention. And that's the kind of thing that we've got to be thinking about. How do we take that deeper or earlier in the phase? Not waiting until they're enrolled in the school, but how do we get them excited about it beforehand, and then maybe even create a way or a path that they don't have to bring on so much debt. If you took away that 30 or 50,000 and found a way to create maybe something a little more tangible for them in the beginning, I believe that changes it as well. I believe that that's going to bring more people into the industry, and they're going to stay. Because like Zach said, they may not make six figures in year one. However, I've been chatting with some friends I have with a group in the automotive space, I'll call it, and they actually recognize their technicians that earn six figures. They actually have a club for these technicians. And now some people may say, well, that may not be right. Well, wait a minute. This is about them billing hours, getting work done, driving revenues, profitability, and most importantly, fixing vehicles for the customer, getting customers back on the road. So they're recognizing and rewarding. We do this across all different facets of the dealership. But I think a lot of times we look at service and we say, hey, it's a revenue spot, but we want to be cautious with how we gain that revenue because we don't want to give up customer service for revenue. Well, you don't have to give either one up. You just have to pair them together. You have to run them in parallel so that they're successful.
I agree. I think that, yeah, I think if they can have that in a way that, helps these Gen Z, not only from my financial standpoint, because let's be real, but how many MBAs do you see in today's market? They spend a fortune going to college. They get I got my MBA, this and that, and what's their entry level position? I mean, they're not even making, it's going to take 6 to 8 years to pay out whatever they did and I've seen people taking 20, 30 years to pay off these student loans. It's kind of crazy. Like they're just never not paying this. And then they go through periods where they're pausing it and then they're redoing it. And it just keeps this crazy cycle. So I agree. I think that 60 grand for, going to a tech and then they just get a job as an entry level and it's not good.
It's hard. It's at $15 an hour. That's roughly 32,000 annualized. And if I'm
that doesn't even buy you a new car.
Debt, right. And now I certainly can't buy a new car. I'm living in my parents' basement or spare bedroom, and I'm liming or walking to work because I don't have the funds. And I'll say this too. You mentioned the MBAs. I think you're right. A lot of people get the MBA because they want to have it on their resume, and maybe it gets you a title. But the interesting thing is sometimes titles can be misleading. A VP at a very small company may not be in the same earnings range as a VP at a large company. And you can even see the inverse of that, right? And I think the other piece that occurs there as well is back to if I'm not earning enough to pay down my debt, then my objective shifts. I'm no longer focused on that job. I'm focused on finding a better paying job. And so now I've lost that interested person. And it parallels a lot to when that customer comes on the lot, right? And you think of an up system, the old up system, right? Where everybody's on the up list and we're waiting. And as a client or customer comes in, that's my up. And that's the same mindset is we've got to find a way to control that ups list because once we've got them in the door and once we've got them on the payroll, we need to keep them. We need to find a way to grow them because that organic program, I think, is what's always been missing. CarMax had a pretty good model on it, but even that wasn't locked in. I think it's just you've got to find ways to motivate them to stay for the long term so that you can build.
I mean, and here's the worst part. This kind of jumps to this next article where now your car could be worth or cost you even $20,000 more, depending on these new tariffs, one for one out of Canada. What do you think about all that?
I think this is the thing. At the end of the day, we can look at it. The reality is it all comes back around, right? And what we're seeing play out is a lot of geopolitics, but we're also seeing a lot of, in my opinion, some people would call it old school saber rattling, right? Of hey, I've got more sway than you. It still comes back to, is it the right thing for the country? Is it the right thing for the consumer? Because remember, in America, our government is there to do things to take care of us, to ensure our freedoms, right? And our ability. And when you start putting tariffs like this on there, I don't know as if I support that, because
Yeah.
to me, I struggle with it. Well, how does that help us? Because all that country's going to do is put the reciprocal on, right? They're going to
Well,
come
that's
right
what
back.
they're doing. And here's the worst part. What did I mean? They just refunded all kinds of billions of dollars to all these other companies, yet everybody else had to pay more for it. I know Zach feels really good about that.
You saw my hit piece talking about Ford and them complaining. Yeah.
Well, well, and I'll take you back a few years. When I was with a automotive cleaning chemical company for a few years, led the administrative and operations side. And when tariffs started coming in and they started talking about it, it made containers coming out of China impossible to find it empty, to load it up. And so you were paying to ship and empty it back just to get your product put in a container and shipped back to you. And so not only were your costs elevated, but your time was triple. So what used to take 30 days was now taking 90 to 120. And you were paying anywhere from 10 to 20, as much as 30 is what I heard people were paying to get an empty container here in the US, because nothing was going back to China from the US. And so the only way to get a container over there and fill it was to ship it. And it was, again, those kind of things. We've got to look at this, I think politics is that line where you're kind of dancing and saying, "Do I hear the ice cracking? Do I need to run back to shore if I talk too much?" And I
That's
think
a good
that's where
analogy.
I think that's where we are, Chris. I think truthfully, a lot of people don't understand, but we're on a frozen pond. And when you think of politics, and it's all about, do I hear the cracking of the ice? And the minute I hear the cracking of the ice, I've got two choices: run back to shore, or take a couple steps back and just stop and hope that it's not cracking underneath me. And I think that's the risk with the tariffs. I think eventually it's just going to drive prices up here. I think consumers are going to shy away from it. We're going to see the growth of our economy is going to stall out again, and it's just, to me, it's a cycle that we're just repeating over and over. I think we need to work harder, work better at finding solutions that are more tangible and more agreeable to the general population.
I'll give you a little bit of an optimistic approach to this. So, which is very contrary to how I normally am. When looking at this, I do feel like this might just be a squeeze to get that pipeline out of Canada. Fair enough, right? They don't really like to play ball, and maybe we could trade them some maple syrup. I don't know. However, I will argue, whenever we talk about bringing manufacturing back to the US, because that's truly the constraint here, is these tariffs matter because parts aren't made here. So if it becomes so expensive to bring parts in from other places, and it starts to run parallel with the argument that, hey, it costs too much to manufacture here, at a certain point, it's just going to be cheaper to manufacture here because it's so expensive to import it. And maybe long term, that is more of the play. I mean, I hope it is, because I would love to see American manufacturing come back. And then the other hand is, you see that start to be reflected more in the cars, and you've got these fuel prices. And what did the administration come out and push? These smaller, more fuel efficient, tiny trucks and SUVs and vehicles. Maybe it all lines up. Maybe there's some master plan or scheme going on that pushes us all forward. But I, I don't disagree. It sucks right now. It is
I do
very
think I do.
expensive.
It sucks. It's unfortunate right now for sure.
Yeah.
I do think though that if that does happen, what will happen is that, yes, it'll be jobs, create jobs here in the U.S. for a period, but the minute these robots take over, they're all gone anyway. Because think about it, these robots are being trained to do basic movements. I just saw a video yesterday about the ones that are in China. These are super robots. They can run faster than Usain Bolt. They can jump higher than anybody in the world. They're smarter. They all have AI in. They can move their hands. They can fold clothes, wash dishes. Who's not to say they're already in China? There's some factories that are near dark, meaning they're all robotic, almost 100%. If that happens, they bring more stuff here. It will get cheaper for sure, but they're not gonna. It's not gonna create more jobs, in my opinion. I think it's gonna displace. Who's the first to go? What's the biggest expense here? The unions, and I imagine I get some pushback from that. But you're gonna. These robots are. It's real. I mean, is that gonna make even any real position that happens? Because what that guy Elon Musk is saying is that there's going to be probably like a billion robots in the world at some point, or 1 to 1. If there's 7 billion people, there's going to be 7 billion robots. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think we're seeing the movie I, Robot play out. I mean, I'm going to tell you the truth. I mean, and it's funny because I watched it just a few weeks ago, and I sat there with my wife and I said, wow, this is eerie, because so much of what's in that movie is what we're talking about now and what we're seeing play out in the world. And I think you're right. I still, though, think the challenge is there's a human in the loop need in a lot of spaces. And what's that percentage? It's tough to put that number out there. Some could argue it's as high as 90%. Some may say, it's not even greater than 5. I don't think you can put that there until you start seeing the mistakes that do occur without a human in the loop. Because I think about like the industry we all come from and we're all in. And I think about if I take my car in and a robot does a brake job and rotates and balances my tires, how do I know with certainty that that robot is getting everything right? And I say this from having been at the forefront of an AI machine learning powered company doing some really cool stuff and really, really big name in the space. And I can tell you that when something went down, when we had downtime, it wasn't a robot. It wasn't the AI. It wasn't the machine learning or the large language model that solved it. It was a human. It was a human. Whether it was a reboot.
Well, you're seeing that now. Yeah. I think, so I'll tell you, I drive my Cybertruck every day, and I do FSD. 98% of the time, it's driving by itself. Every now and then, it miss an exit, or it's, there's some goofy thing that it does that maybe instead of parking closer to the parking spot, it's like, far away. So like there's certain nuances still that human involvement needs to get, even if it's 50% of the staff at those factories. They're already at 90% in China near dark. I'd say it's probably going to be closer to that point than anything else. I think it's just not, I'm thinking 5 years from now, because I think at the end of this year or beginning of next is when Optimus starts coming out. Mm-hmm. And I don't know when China, more than likely they're not getting the cars here. I can't imagine them letting robots in here either. So, but Japan may create some stuff. There's nothing will surprise me at this point. Everything is like, you saw the movie Demolition Man. That everything seems like it's coming to pass there. Mm-hmm. Robots coming to pass. Like everybody, we all thought about it watching these movies. Now it's here. It's kind of. Yeah. It's kind of interesting. Now they're talking about flying cars here shortly. I don't know if you guys have heard that, but
it's already exists in the agricultural space.
We're close. You've got 2 companies out there that have got FAA approval for demo, and they just haven't launched true passenger flights for these robo taxi helicopter style aircraft. And I think as those truly get to that point of, yes, we're going to do passenger flights open to the public, I think we're going to see that transition move very quickly. And I think it still comes back to how do we, there's going to be a cost there too. So not everybody's going to be able to afford to outfit their shop or their factory or their assembly and their production with robots. They're still going to have to do it with human help. And there's going to come what is that intersection? What is that cost factor versus my ROI, right? And how do I get there Is it driven by scale? Is it driven by something else? I think there are risk factors, right, that maybe robots mitigate, but then there's risk factors that the robots bring. And you're going to see, I think, a new era of even jobs, if you will, that come in
Yeah.
that manage how the robots are implemented and how the robots are managed going forward. So,
I think you're right. It's just another industry. This one kind of moves this way because at one point there was horse salesmen, right?
yeah,
Now there's not as many horse salesmen.
Hold on, you said
know?
horse, right? Like the four-legged
Yes.
animal?
Yes. Horse.
Equine. Okay.
I need to enunciate a little bit better, but hey, you won't need any robots at these stores. Let me tell you this next headline real quick. This one, I can't imagine you need even people. I mean, you got car dealership guy reported yesterday 60 of 86 dealers had zero. They were sitting on a goose egg for the month of August in sales. So that's a big percentage. I mean, you think about being in that store, like I'd be questioning my whole life if I hadn't sold a car the whole month as a dealership. What do you guys think?
Well, it doesn't surprise me. That
This is
brand
Maserati, by the way.
right,
It's
right.
great car. I mean, I thought it's always good looking car, but when you look at some of the comments, I posted this yesterday. One comment, somebody said, and actually I know who she is. She said, "I have owned two, and I spent more on service than any car payments I ever had for the life." So when you think about that, and it's not that I've heard it from a lot of people that they're constantly in the shop.
Back in the day, I looked at one in wholesale and said, wow, this is a beautiful car, low miles. We were in it right. And I was like, I think I'm going to buy this. And I talked to a fellow team member there who owned one. And you know who I'm talking about. And I said, hey, how's this car? He goes, it's great to drive, but the worst drive is to the service department. He says, so painful. He said, it's 4 figures every time. Just for an oil change. He says it's like $1,500. And I was like, really? And that was it. That was the end of my love affair with that brand. So, but back to the question, does it surprise me? No. The reason being is I just don't think they're competitive with the other, luxury brands, whether they're domestic or imported. And I think the choices now, and whether it's an ICE vehicle or an EV or a hybrid, I think consumers are going to look at it and say, I can go and I can buy this other brand and my maintenance cost is going to be next to nothing compared to yours. And then I will say this, they do need people though, because clearly it sounds like there's nobody in the dealerships because they're not selling. There's nobody working the uplift. But then again, if there's nothing on the up list, there's no work. So I don't know, maybe that's where the robots, if I'm Maserati, maybe I bring robots into the showroom to see if it changes it. Maybe it's a novelty play.
Well, here's the challenge too. I see, I'm not saying specifically that brand, but I've seen other brands where they've got a 2-month wait before they can even get into service, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
are they like that? Are they expanding their capacity? Are they trying to figure out a way to capture more of those customers to retain them so they don't go somewhere else?
And that's another great question.
The thing is the parts, right? Do they even have parts available? Because they're probably stuck on the Hormuz Strait where we're in this other debacle that's causing more price increases.
Yeah.
Zach, I know you want to comment on that one, sir.
I'll start with Maserati. I feel like Maserati for me, Marty, going back to whenever you almost bought one, I've never peer pressured you so hard in my life. So I'm glad it didn't work in that equation because, I've got to rely on an inheritance one day, hopefully. But then whenever you look at Maserati as a whole, Maserati, I guess whenever I think of luxury brands, I almost want to equate it to like Toyota and Lexus, right? Where they've got their sub-brand, but then they create this luxury variant, but it's still a good car at its core, in quotes. Then you look at Maserati. Maserati doesn't have that. Instead, they're like, hey, how can I piecemeal this from Ferrari and all these other different manufacturers, cobble something together and push it out, so that reliability factor has never been there. It's the same way with British cars. It's the same way with like Jaguar, who that's another story about their whole artistic, DEI, cover yourself in blood, absolute PR disaster that they pulled. And it doesn't surprise me that Maserati's in the exact same boat, because if you don't have an emphasis on quality, and I know no Maserati techs, like literally none, and you just want to cater to this niche market who is, what, too poor for a Ferrari but feels like their nose is too far in the air for a Lexus, then what do you expect, especially in a consolidating economy?
Yeah. I don't think you missed much there. I go back to I can't list anybody I know that works for Maserati today. You don't see them on the road, so it doesn't surprise me. I mean, they're out there, I know, but people aren't driving them as a daily driver because it's too expensive to drive it as a daily. And I think it comes back again to, when's the last time you saw really any kind of marketing or even just press release here in the US that was promoting the brand, promoting the models? Now, this is the only press release I've seen on Maserati in the last 12 months. You know,
Well, and that wasn't really a press release. That was just some car dealership guy
right.
talked to a dealer, and then he said, "Man, I just heard about a dealer where 60 of the dealers haven't sold a car this month," and one of the comments was, maybe they're sandbagging, and I'm like, well, I mean, it's the end of the month. I
Well,
hate to think you're
or,
sandbagging.
or maybe our friends out in Arizona, affectionately the Carvana crew, is going to buy up a couple of the dealerships and blow the sales through the roof in the next 90 days. Maybe that's the model they need, right? I mean,
They
I
need
doubt it.
something. They need something. Well, before we wrap up, there's one more article I wanted to touch base on. There's actually it's like two in one. So FTC allegation is a dealer that, payment packing, and then another bad apple, a $2 million lawsuit that sued because something about, credit information, other contract details were misrepresented. And when I read these articles, the reason why I wanted to bring it up, because I recently saw a social post for a guy named, I forget his name, Zach. His name's Zach, I think. I forget his last name though. And he's with Car Edge.
Mhm.
And you talk about a company that I think is putting some real pressure on the other traditional listing sites, is this company. And the reason why I say that is he's calling people out left, like he's literally showing a dealer. He's like, man, here's a Toyota dealer. This is what they're priced on Car Gurus. This is what it says. Everything's, accepted. Like everything's disclosed online. Then you go to the store and they've got a $4,000 addendum and all kinds of ads. And I'm like, okay, so these people are clearly, and this is just yesterday, these people are clearly not looking at the FTC allegation where they're getting sued, this dealer group, and then this other dealer having to pay $2 million lawsuit because of these questionable tactics that they're doing. At what point do you think dealers listen to articles, podcasts like ours, that they wake up and say, hey, look, maybe we need to do something?
I've been asking that question for a while.
20. Well, how long? When did you start in automotive with CarMax?
CarMax 99.
99.
So
Okay, I started in 03. So think about it. You've been questioning it since you got there. Zach, what do you think? What do you think about all of this?
Well,
He's got something.
2015 for me, my little CarMax badge. But it's shocking that you still have people who are so ignorant to the fact that everything is online, everything is posted, everything is recorded and streamed, and then
Forever. It's not like it's,
yeah.
one and done. It's forever. Like they're going to go back and they're
yeah.
going to review the tape. Like it's wild.
Is it true just ignorance? Is it the audacity to think that you're not going to be targeted as well? Or is it just bad business trying to pull the wool over somebody's eyes and act like you're I don't comprehend how you can be this idiotic in our industry today, especially with all these people out there who are creating videos and saying, oh, well, I called this dealer out, this salesman on the phone, and you're trashing careers, and you still are going to act that way? It's baffling.
Well, it's the old beg for forgiveness play. That's really how I see it is, I'm going to play above the fray where I need to, but then if I want to change the price and I want to put in an addendum on it, if I want to make some kind of, oh, we're out of that one, but we've got this one, kind of the old bait and switch, which was really a problem years ago. And that kind of went away. And now we see what we have
Well,
today.
it's been redisguised, right? It's been redisguised.
Exactly.
I mean, it's the same
Yeah.
thing. It just now they moved it this way.
Yeah, because if you remember back when car dealers published in the newspaper, if you remember, there was a newspaper, they printed it off and threw it on your driveway every morning.
Zach
And
doesn't know those days.
Zach doesn't know those. He knows the online, but they had to list the stock number, right? They had to put, here's the unique stock number, and it never failed. You could drive into that dealership, say, I want this one. Oh, we just sold it. They didn't have it to begin with. A stock number is a dummy, right? But the problem with it is the litigation is going to keep piling up until there's a decision, until there's a realization that you can't keep doing this, because the industry has always had this ebb and flow of having kind of a negative connotation around this kind of behavior, and then you clean it up and everybody's like, oh no, it's good, this dealer, that dealer, they operate above board. And we want to believe that, but in order to really believe it, in order to live it, we have to change. And the industry can't keep allowing this kind of behavior to go on and think that, oh, that just puts a black eye on that particular dealership or that particular group or organization. It puts a black eye on the whole. And every one of us in the industry, and you think back, how many times have you had somebody question the ethics of the industry to you? It happens too often. We need to do better. We need to do better around the ethics and really try, not just try, we need to do. We need to do it because, you guys mentioned something about experience. Experience is what you get when you don't get what you want, right? And when you say you're going to try, it means you're beginning to fail. And so we need to change, and we need to make these changes. We need to not be afraid to tell dealerships or groups that make bad decisions and get caught in this. We need to not be afraid to tell them, hey, that's not okay. We need to hold them accountable internally within the industry. And we do need those organizations, whether it's state level or federal level, levying fines. And that ideally is going to change it. But I think it still comes down to there has to be, I'm going to call it peer pressure internally within the automotive industry to not allow our peers to do something out of line. And I think when we look at successful industries, we've talked a lot about robotics and AI. I think there's a lot of pressure in there to try to stay within an ethical world, right? We've got a lot of oversight pressuring that and limiting releases of different iterations of AI. We need more oversight here, and some of it is internal. We can't just rely on states or federal agencies to hold us accountable. We have to look at the agencies and the organizations. We've got some great ones. We've got NADA. We've got, a lot of different other organizations. We need to ask and establish some guidelines there where there's maybe a certification program even, and I'm kind of out there spiffballing now, but how do you get something that gives that consumer more confidence that I can walk into a dealership and I know I'm not going to be taken advantage of. I know I'm going to get fair treatment. And the dealership should feel good about that too, because it allows you to go home, feel good. And that's something I will say about 20 years at CarMax. There wasn't a day I ever went home and felt bad about a decision we made for a customer. Everything was made with the customer first and then the employee second. And I think that's huge. And if everybody in the industry will operate from that playbook, it changes quick.
I agree. I wish everybody had that same thought process. And, I think with technology today, you're going to see just only more of these headlines with the FTC. And I think that we're just in a time that you cannot claim ignorance. You cannot claim like, I didn't know, well, he was doing it. And I think part of our industry is there's just not a lot of training. There's not a lot of, it's either sink or swim. Someone taught me the old way, and this is the way we're doing it. We've been doing it for 100 years, and never got caught before, and so we're doing it. And it's you've got to educate yourself, and you cannot. With information at your fingertips as easily as it's ever been in the world, in history, you need to do better. So,
Absolutely.
Zach. So before we head on, we're nearing the end, and I hate to cut it off like this, but before we leave, I always like to ask how everything we talked about quite a few things today. How can we tie it all together and help our audience get better or apply it in their business today? Zach, you want to go first?
I really like what Marty said with trying to hold each other accountable to do the right things. And I've always heard the automotive industry referred to, and it's mostly in a negative light, with it's a good old boys club. Well, maybe we act more like that. Now, hear me out before you freak out, but maybe we act more like that as far as helping each other out, actually being a club or a fraternity and holding each other accountable and making sure that, hey, your neighbor or sister dealership down the road is doing the right thing by the customer. If they're not, well, then why in the hell are they getting invited to recruit out of our trade schools? Why are they getting invited to NADA? Why are the manufacturers not just pulling, their charter or their, ability to sell cars? Why aren't we acting more like that so we can all rise to the occasion, especially in a challenging industry? And I think at the end of the day, it comes down to doing the right things for the right reasons 100% of the time. And if you're doing that, you'll likely have some success. And also, don't sell Maseratis right now.
Today's not probably a good time for that. Marty, what do you think?
Zach's really very close to where I am. I agree entirely with do the right thing for the right reasons, especially when nobody's watching, right? And that's something I've lived my career. I've trained, and I believe it's critical. The other thing I think is we need to slow down. Sometimes in this industry we're running really fast. We're trying to take care of every customer. We've got associate challenges, we've got vendor challenges, we've got things going on, right? It doesn't matter whether it's a traditional dealership, a used car company, an independent repair shop, an MSO in the space. Everybody's running as fast as they can. However, if you slow down just a little bit to pause, take a good assessment, and then develop your plan and your response, you're going to change the things that you're working on for the better, and you're actually going to move faster. And that's really what I would encourage everybody in the space and everybody listening is finding ways to slow down to go fast. It's something I've preached for the majority of my career, because every time you run into somebody, they're always looking for the deadline. Hey, you're going to meet that deadline, right? Well, do we understand what the deadline is? Do we understand what the expectations are? And more importantly, do we know how to get there the right way for the right reason? And the only way to do that is to slow down and make sure we've got all of the tools, all the resources, all the knowledge, and even the right people to help us achieve that. And if we can do that, and again, I agree with layer in some controls too. Is there some, hey, if you're going to be part of NADA, it's not just, hey, I filled out a form, said I want to be in, and I pay my dues. Show us that you earned the right to have that. I go back to, it sounds kind of funny, but Better Business Bureau, right? There was a time where that was a big deal and those stickers were all over the doors. And I can promise you, there wasn't a CarMax location that didn't have them. It wasn't involved. And that's, I think there's a need to get back to that mentality of the change the perception of the consumer by changing the perception of ourselves. So if we think there's a dealership or a group out there that's not above board, let's change. Let's work together to help them. Don't just throw rocks. We're all in a glass house. We need to work together.
Go ahead, Zach.
I was going to say, I think that collectively, as an entire industry, everybody this weekend or whenever you have free time, go watch the movie Tommy Boy.
That's a good one. That's a good movie. I like it. You can get what was the saying he said? You can get a
good look at a T-bone steak by sticking your head up a bull's ass, but I'd rather take the butcher's word for it.
That's a great movie.
Well, I just think ironically, there are a lot of lines in that movie to take away. But again, it comes back to, I think you can take lines from whether it's Tommy Boy or any movie. I think there's so many great examples that are out there. But again, it just comes back to do the right things for the right reasons, especially when no one's looking, and slow down to go fast, because it will change the way you run your business. And more importantly, it'll change the way your customers see you.
I agree. I think do the right thing even when it's not the easiest thing to do. I think because the right thing to do is always the right thing to do. I think oftentimes it's so much easier just to do, the wrong thing than to do the right thing. That people, they get stuck and they just say, well, man, I can make, $6,000 here if I just do this. And at the end of the night, you want to look at yourself in the mirror and feel good about yourself. And more importantly, I think oftentimes people think that they want someone to be the example and learn from. And at the end of the day, sometimes you need to be that example. And so you need to do the right thing and push yourself to be better. So everything you guys said, sage advice, great talking today. Everything that we went through today, I think we could have gone even longer. There's so many other articles this last week that I posted that there's just a lot there. Like, I think today, with the information as easily as it's available, I think everybody just needs to just start learning. Turn on a podcast, open social media. I know some people are just people that just don't want to be about social media, and they just listen to mainstream media. That's not where your information is today. If you're looking at mainstream media, that news is like 2 months old right now. So if you need to understand where you're at in today's business, open up some podcasts, open up LinkedIn, social media. I promise you'll learn a lot more there than you will on mainstream media. But until next time, Marty, thank you for joining us. I hope next we can get you on the pod again soon. It's great to talk with you, and over the years, understanding that you were a big part of what I learned in this business, and I've been able to take it with me everywhere I've gone and been able to do some pretty big things with it. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
But until next time, I want everybody, please like, share, subscribe, do your thing. Until next time, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.